This was probably the most emotional experience I've ever had in my adult life. Cleaning up homes, making sure people were alive was like kind of the first two stages. My name is Abigail Bentley. I go by Abby, and I am a high school science teacher at Pisgah High School, where I teach biology and earth science.
So Abby, you had some personal experiences during Hurricane Helene. You also witnessed other people going through a lot of those. Can you just kind of start wherever you want to with that story?
Well, the hurricane hit. It started on the Wednesday, I guess. So that's when it started raining. And our school dismissed for Thursday and Friday because in 2021 we were hit by Tropical Storm Fred. And during that time we got stuck at one point. Well, I didn't, but some of our bus drivers were stuck on a flooded road with students. And so out of an abundance of caution, the county decided that we should, knowing how it flooded then, we should take 2 days off just to prepare. Every business would have time to clear out, and houses, people would have time to clear out if there was a risk of flooding based on our previous experience. By Friday morning, after the bulk of the rain had come, it was very clear that this was going to be worse than it was in 2021. We were getting lots of SOS text messages coming in saying things like imminent dam failure, evacuate now, and every road in Haywood County is closed, and letting the imagination kind of go crazy. At 3 a.m, we heard a very loud bang outside my house, and when we couldn't really see because it was very dark and it was still really rainy and windy, but it was clear that our cars had been crushed by a tree. It landed on our well. And so when we woke up on Friday, we already knew that because we're on a hill and we thought we were in a more safe zone, we already knew that there were going to be other places in town that were way worse off. So very scared the first few days just because information was lacking. There was no service. Nobody could connect with each other. And so it was really just driving. Well, we weren't driving anywhere, but checking in with people around and checking in with neighbors to see how they were doing. So the first few days of the storm was just clean up in your own space. I think that's generally what was going on, at least in my world, probably for a lot of others. So many trees were down that people were chainsawing immediately. We were out with a chainsaw by 10 a.m. We had probably 4 different people at our house chainsawing the trees off our car. And then after we finished our cars, we moved on to trees in our neighbors' driveways. Most people on my road and other roads were blocked in one way or another, whether it was their personal driveway or the road getting out to the main road. There were just down trees everywhere. I think Newfound Road alone, which is the road I live off of, probably had close to 8 trees down. I've heard between 5 and 8 just based on testimonials. I certainly saw at least 5 myself. And so that was the bulk of cleanup in the initial phase. I would say that was like the very first round. Then after the first couple days of making sure people could get out, trying to get in contact with people just by driving and figuring out who you can get in touch with, then we got into, my group at least that I've been working with, got to the next phase of like shoveling out houses. So then once we made sure everybody was alive and okay, we started working on houses on Max Thompson, which is right next to the river. So we're shoveling out a lot of my friends that live there, figuring out what the needs were in town. And by the late, I guess probably 5 days, so I guess midweek, the following week after the storm, then it was aid station relief. So it kind of, I would say that we went through different phases of recovery. Chainsawing was kind of like the main priority, getting people out of their homes. Cleaning up homes, making sure people were alive was like kind of the first 2 stages. And then I would say the efforts really focused on making sure people had food and water and toiletries right after that. And so multiple aid stations opened up in town. And again, no service, there's no word of mouth. So we actually had made flyers and were giving them out to gas stations. We had made cardboard signs around town. And we had just posted up at the high school with a bunch of folding tables, hoping that people would hear about us, and it ended up working out, and we got a lot of donations. So that was kind of the tail end of the recovery, was making sure people had food and water.
Can you kind of give us like the context of this area? Like, is it normal for a hurricane to hit here? Where is this in the state of North Carolina? Just for people who might not be familiar.
Yeah, so we are currently, where we are in Canton is about 30 minutes west of Asheville, and we are in the mountains of North Carolina. So we are very much part of the western region of the state. We are about 30 minutes from the border of Tennessee. So it is very, very unusual to get a hurricane here. We have definitely experienced flooding in the past from heavy rains just because there are so many river systems that come down from the mountain. So we accumulate all the water in town, and then we get all the water coming down from the mountains that will swell the rivers pretty good. But I would say it's highly unlikely that we would get this amount of rain in this short time frame in addition to the heavy winds. And I think the winds were an added component that we were not ready for. So it's very unlikely to get it in this area, and it seems that it is becoming more common. We were told in 21 that it was a 100-year flood, and then we were told this time it was a 500-year flood. So I'm waiting for those years to pass before we see another.
Tell me a little bit about how this area got hit compared to some of the other nearby ones.
I honestly haven't done much traveling to see the other locations. Based on what I have seen here and based on the people I've talked to in my circle that exist in other of the western counties, I would say Haywood was sort of in the middle as far as its damage. We definitely suffered significant damage to our road systems, to our water systems. A lot of our small businesses took a huge hit, whether that was actual flooding damage, wind damage from trees, or if it was economic damage from the repercussions of just not being able to hold visitors during this time. I would say, like, damage-wise, in comparison to places like Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is, just a little bit east of us, and places that are a little bit north of us, actually got a little bit worse as far as just the amount of mud and debris that was washed up into their areas. So it's hard to do the comparisons, not having seen the other locations for myself, but I would say that we're all still trying to work through what is going on. I think it's estimated that something like 150 structures were damaged to the extent that they're not going to reopen, or they need structural replacements, is what I have heard the estimates referring to. So it's hard to say really what the comparisons are like, but I know that there's a lot of suffering going on across western North Carolina. I know that even within Haywood County, there's a lot of disparities with what was affected. Like people that live in Clyde and Crusoe, which are closer to the rivers and have maybe not less resources, but just are more off-grid, I would say, just like farther out from town, certainly saw significant damage. Their road systems, a lot of them are, rocky roads, dirt roads. And so water certainly has a bigger effect on that in comparison to pavement. And so I would say that even within the county, there's certain areas that were heavily affected in comparison with others.
Can you tell me more about just the impact this had on you emotionally, and like what was difficult in those initial days of recovery?
I think overall, I will also add, I lost one of my very best friends during this hurricane. There was debris that was flying around, and she was in the line of fire, I guess you could say, of that. And so it was very personal to me with losing my vehicles, having damage to our house and our well, losing a friend, and then knowing what the experience would be like for other people that probably also went through those things, and just knowing that as a community we would be grieving for a really long time was really challenging. Going to school was really hard. So a lot of our students, I would say, I'm not a medical professional. I can't say for certain that there's PTSD or anything, but I would certainly say that our students, it's very familiar in their mind what happened in 2021 when we saw Tropical Storm Fred come through. So I think even when it starts to rain here or we get heavy winds, you can see that there's nerves, right? I know, especially even at some of our younger age kids in elementary school, some of them will start crying at school if they feel nervous. But a lot of them lost their house. So it's a really appropriate reaction when they look outside and they see, oh, it's downpouring again. Should I be worried? Do we need to call out school? Am I going to get stuck on the bus? And so I think overall, there's a layer of fear that has not come true, and then there's a very real layer of fear that is based and rooted in experience that we are having to work through, because we've seen what can happen now twice in the last 3 years. And I think it's just really hard to work through all that and then also be trying to go to school, also be trying to go to work. I know it was a shock to me when we ended up going back to school. I think we had 3 weeks in total off from the hurricane. And for me, that felt really soon because I didn't even have running water at my house. And so it felt crazy to try and go to school when I don't have running water, or, I can't imagine that some of my students had running water. I think we had about 26 students added to our homeless list after the hurricane. And so it's just really hard to try and prioritize things like learning and curriculum when you have students and your own needs not being met. And that's a very emotional experience.
I'm very sorry to hear about your friend. If it's okay, are you comfortable telling me any more about that, about your relationship or what happened?
So she was also a teacher. She did not live in this county. She was actually just north of us in Virginia by about 2 hours. So it was pretty shocking to hear. I didn't find out until we were able to get service, which took a couple days. And so it essentially the same kind of effects that we're seeing here, really, really high winds, a lot of rain, and it was less of a flooding issue there and more just the wind speeds. I know that here the winds were clocking in around 50 to 60 miles per hour, and this individual lived in a very open cow pasture field, and so there was no, windbreak. There's no structures surrounding their home, there's no trees surrounding their home, and so the authorities actually think that there was micro tornadoes in a lot of these places, including in Canton. I've heard from multiple people that debris from some of their structures, sheds, or garages ended up really, really far out in fields, and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know how it could have gotten there, and it's all spread out. And so I think that there was evidence that there could have been small tornadoes coming through from the wind, and that is what they think happened at, her name was Holly, that's what happened at Holly's house, is they think that there was a tornado and debris was swept up, and she was outside during that time trying to take care of her animals. So she was also a teacher, which I know for me, it was very hard to be at the service. Many of our students were there, and I think seeing the impact that we have on our students in that setting especially was really challenging, especially after everything that went on here. And I think that student-teacher relationship is really special, especially in times of communal grief. Even though I had expressed some of my own concerns to my administrators about going back to school so soon, and the overall consensus was, well, one, parents are going back to work and we need children to be under care of certain, we can't leave kids at home, and two, we need community right now. And so it's important that we prioritize being together, even if maybe we're not focused directly day one back on curriculum. We're focused on making sure that people have people to talk to, right? Because I wasn't the only one that lost people. I wasn't the only one that went through significant damage. And so it's important that we all are able to commiserate on those things together and move forward together.
Can you tell me more about reactions you've seen in the classroom from students? Say a storm is approaching, you've noticed a difference?
I think overall there's just an expectation that maybe we're going to go home. There's always kind of how bad is it going to be? Are we going home? Should we prepare? That kind of question. I think that some students, they all handle their stress and anxiety about it a little differently. I would say my students at the high school level often will resort to joking, kind of laughing oh, well, maybe we'll get out of school kind of thing. That's not true of all of them. I think others do kind of shut down, get very scared, get worried about their homes. If they are somebody that lives near the river, get worried about maybe family members. So it kind of depends. I think they all manage the stress a little bit differently. I know from talking to some of my middle school and elementary school counterparts that they see a lot more anxiety manifesting in ways that you might imagine, like crying or sharing that they're anxious with teachers. Certainly, I spoke to one of our lead teachers at Pisgah High School, and she used to work at an elementary school, and she told me a story that when they could hear the rain on the top of the building, a lot of kids were crying. They were very scared because just hearing that rain triggered a lot of emotions, gave them kind of the flashbacks to what they had experienced in Tropical Storm Fred. And so I think it's really dependent on, one, what was their experience in the flood of how they're going to react, and in the hurricane from the previous experience and this one, and then what is at stake for them. I think it's just really dependent on those conditions with how they'll react, but certainly there's a lot of anxiety and questions around what is Canton going to look like in a couple years if this continues to happen? Are we going to be able to rebuild each time? I think that some people are choosing to continue to rebuild in the same spots, and some are choosing that maybe we need to relocate certain things. Sorry, there's a truck coming through. But I think overall it's just everybody's got their own independent reactions, and everybody's got their own independent opinions of what's the best way to move forward after something like this. So it's kind of hard to say where everyone's head is at. Certainly there are effects emotionally.
When it comes to you personally on that, can you tell me about what are the steps, or is there anything you've done to process some of this? I know you mentioned before to me that it made you think about your career deeply, maybe in your role there.
Well, yeah, it really did, because after losing Holly and losing our vehicles and then not having access to clean water, and I didn't have power for 15 days, and being asked to go back to work immediately after. I mean, this was not a 3-week vacation. I spent every single day either chainsawing stuff, moving lumber, shoveling out people's houses, working at aid stations. It was not restful. I wouldn't say that I had time to process in the recovery phase. And so it was a big ask, it felt, to tell people to get back to school and to work following the trauma that happened. I felt it was crazy, but at the same time, what is the alternative, right? You can't stay out forever. You can't neglect your responsibilities, and it's important to find community. I agree with all those points. And a lot of our kids that weren't affected, because some people weren't, some people were just on a hill or really lucky and a tree didn't fall on any of their stuff. And so you have to make sure that when you're working at a school, you're serving everybody, and that includes people that were affected and people that weren't affected. And so I think that's really hard to serve everybody. You're never going to serve everybody perfectly. And so I was really struggling with feeling that I didn't have enough time to recover. How can I support my students' needs emotionally when I'm not even emotionally, well or supported? And so that was really challenging. I questioned whether I could go back. I did take the first day back off. I just wasn't ready. I felt like I was going to cry in front of my kids, and I didn't think that was appropriate. I think there's some level of emotion that's appropriate to show at work, especially after something like this. You are human, and you can, make a lot of connections by showing your authentic self. But I think at some level, you have to determine what level of appropriateness and professionalism can you carry, and I felt like the first day back, I just needed to stay away for another day. So I did end up going back the second day, and it was a somber mood. People were quiet. People, I would say, at least in my classes, didn't really know what to expect of going back to school. I didn't know what to expect either, and I was teaching, I was running the show, and I didn't even know what was going to come out for me or for them. So I think we were all trying to be really conscious of that, and there was a lot of grace given to students and to staff. The priority was certainly trying to get back to normal at school as soon as possible, which I don't know if I fully agree with how quickly we jumped back in, but in some ways I felt like I was the one that was, behind. I think our students have shown incredible resiliency, and so maybe I got to take notes from them a little bit.
Did you feel the responsibility to be tough for them, or sort of be strong for them?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think I wanted them to know that it's okay to show emotion. I wouldn't say I was necessarily trying to hide my emotions. I was starting to feel numb at some points, because I was trying to take my personal experiences out and just be a community member for a minute. So I maybe wasn't handling it the best way I should have, but I do feel like I had some responsibility to lead them, maybe not academically at that moment, but emotionally, and try and maybe not even be strong for them, but just be present for them, not knowing what each individual went through. We got a list of the students that had lost their homes, or their homes were damaged to the extent that they were displaced for a little while. So we had a rough idea of who was experiencing that as an issue. But I think like there are so many hidden things too. Like even if maybe you didn't lose your home, you could have had a best friend that lost a home, or you could have had a family member that lost a home, or you could have just seen a lot of uncomfortable things. I mean, just if you left your house on that Friday or Saturday, you certainly saw a lot of your favorite places underwater and significantly damaged. So whether the damage was to you personally, or to your neighbor, or to somebody nearby, I think that there's a lot of hidden, I don't know necessarily if it's the right word to use, trauma, but there's certainly a lot of hidden emotions around that. So it was just really hard to decide what was the best approach with those students. Do you jump back in? I mean, certainly I would say almost everybody at the school took a couple days to check in and just be a communal place, making sure students have the resources they need at home, food and water and toiletries and all that kind of stuff. But it was really hard to say, like, this is the day we go back to curriculum, because it never feels like the right time when there's so much damage around you. Like, it just doesn't feel right. And it also felt for me, and I can't speak for other teachers at the school, but for me it felt like there were other priorities in town over teaching. Not that I didn't want to be with my kids and be there to support them, but I mean, again, I didn't have water, right? Like I felt like I wanted to be on the phone with FEMA. I wanted to be on the phone with my landlord. I wanted to be on the phone with my insurance company for my cars. Like I still had a lot of background stuff going on that I felt like I couldn't get done, because I was also trying to go back to school, and I was also trying to grieve the loss of my friend, and I was also trying to get all my life back together. So it was just like so much happening at once, and it was all like colliding at once, and it was really overwhelming. But we're starting to like settle out now.
Well, even something as basic as taking a shower, I'm sure it was like a huge pain.
Yeah, I mean, like I had to drive 15 minutes to go to a friend's house to shower, a friend that got water back. And we are guessing, we don't know this for sure, but we're guessing the reason that she was able to get her power back so quickly is because she's next to the nursing home, and I think that they were prioritizing the higher need areas like that. So she just happened to be lucky and kind of be on the same power lines as that, is our guess of why it came back so soon for her. But yeah, I was driving to go, shower at a friend's house, and we even packed up our dishes and had to bring our dishes to a friend's house at one point because we tried really hard to not use a lot. We were filtering rainwater. I mean, we luckily have a rain catchment system at the house, so we had a 55-gallon barrel of rainwater that was collected. So we were able to use that to flush our toilets. We were able to use that to filter if we needed like water, because we filled water for a few days, but when you're on 3 weeks without fresh water, you're going to run out, no matter how many pots and you fill at your house and how many tubs you fill. So yeah, it was just felt like exhausting. We were running out of laundry. We were running out of dishes. We were eating just like crap food all the time, like whatever, dehydrated stuff, cheap ramen, cheap meals. And when you're used to cooking for yourself every night, when you're used to doing laundry at home, showering when you want to, it's just like a really big adjustment to try and manage all of the basic needs and then also go back to school and work at a high-performing, high-demand job.
It's like all your normalcy is gone, all your routines are gone.
Yeah.
When it comes to the recovery and the cleanup, obviously the internet was buzzing with all kinds of claims and statements, and it's hard to know anything without really being here. So I don't expect you to speak for everybody, of course, but in your personal experience, what was that whole process like?
Yeah, I think everybody has a different perception of what happened, and everybody has a different experience. We were able to figure out, just based on our community connections, where FEMA was set up pretty early on. So we were able to find FEMA and fill out our applications pretty quickly, and get our money from the federal services. I don't know that everybody had an easy time with that. I can't speak for everybody. I also think that dependent on where you were in the region, recovery was quicker. So I've spoken with a few people to explain that I think that areas in Haywood County were recovered quicker than areas in Buncombe County. And there's a few layers to why. Like, one is certainly that Buncombe County was very heavily impacted. Like, I would say if we're ranking this on a scale of 1 to 10, like Haywood was probably at a 6 or 7. Buncombe was probably at like an 8 or 9. So there was more damage there. That's just harder to manage, more mud, stuff like that. but there's also an added layer of like, what resources do you have accessible to you? And I think people in Haywood County, we have more land. So many of us have sheds or garages that have equipment like chainsaws, like shovels, like rakes, like all of the squeegees, stuff that you would need, sump pumps, generators, like we don't live in apartments, most of us. I mean, some of us do, but many people around here have their own space and their own equipment. And so it was like, we woke up Friday morning, everybody gets their generator, everybody gets their chainsaw, we get to work. We all got fuel in the garage, that kind of thing. If you compare that to a place like Buncombe County, where most people, and again, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of the population is living in smaller apartments, many of them didn't have the ability to like jump into action really quickly. Many of them were stranded. They didn't have a chainsaw to chainsaw their way out if their car was not flooded, And so I think like ultimately Haywood had the mindset of like, we know what to do. We also were just got done dealing with a flood from 3 years ago. And so people were very quick to jump into action and know the right steps to take. We already knew, some people had prepared in different ways because they had experienced this in the past. And so I think that knowledge of the previous experience, the accessibility and the ability to kind of hold our own out here, I would say, or like, have the resources to jump into action really quickly was a big factor. Having a little bit less damage was a big factor. And so overall, I would say that our recovery was a little faster for those reasons. And it was very community oriented. And I think Haywood, just being smaller, has that closer knit community, and not that Buncombe doesn't have that. It's just there are so many more people there that Buncombe County, I think, and other counties might have had a harder time developing that kind of like model really quickly of like what needs to get done. The assessment portion and then the action portion probably took a little bit longer for them, just for those reasons, is my guess.
What else is there about any of this that you think is just like important to highlight? Especially your personal experience with it.
I think it's important that for any almost like having the perspective is important. I, again, had never gone through something like this, and I would never wish it on anybody or want to go through it again. But I do think that having this perspective of what the damage can look like is valuable, because there are so many times that we're watching the news and you see a huge hurricane hit Florida or the eastern side of the state or whatever, and you say to yourself, oh, that's so sad, I feel for them, and then you kind of move on with your life. And it's crazy now to think about how many times I've seen that happen and not really given it a thought, because now I look around and we're a month and change out from the flood. We're almost 2 months out from the flood or the hurricane. And I'm like, oh, there's still so much work to be done emotionally and physically. There's so much to be done. I think it's important that people realize that it's not over. Even if the news is done talking about it, it's not done. People here are still suffering. People in all those other places that we had watched on the news before were still suffering. And so that perspective's important. Making sure that the places that are impacted by natural disasters aren't forgotten just because the initial work is done, just because we had debris removal round 1 completed, just because people are off the boil advisory, does not mean that the work is done. And I think it's important to make sure that we don't leave people without the resources and support that they need just because the initial stage is over. It's almost like there are multiple, there's multiple stages in the cleanup, but then if you zoom out even more, there's multiple stages in the recovery. And I think the physical portion is the first part, like making sure trees are removed and businesses' lights can come back on and people have clean water to drink. But then the next phase is like the emotional damage and the lasting damage on a lot of our infrastructure, right? So, there is still a lot of debris piles around town that we need to clean up. And I think that it's just so hard to convey to people that don't live in the area what it still looks like and what it still feels like for the people that live here. So I think just overall sharing the message like you're doing, connecting with people in the region, and I know that you have plans to talk to other people, and I really hope you do, because this is just one county's experience and one person's view of that experience. And obviously there's a lot more perspectives out there of what might need to happen moving forward. But overall, I think the message to the world should just be to, when you see a natural disaster on TV, really think about it for a minute. Think about what the effect is on other people. I hope I'll carry that with me as I move forward in life. I hope I'll remember this experience for the humanity of it. I think the community really came together in a lot of ways that was really beautiful. And there was like weirdly a lot of really positives and silver linings that came out of this because of the connections that were made. I didn't even talk about the aid station, but like a couple of our friends started it and it just got the ball rolling. And we had a needs list and we had an offers list. And there were independent contractors coming through that we were just like deploying to random places. And it was like crazy how many people were willing to give their time and resources for free. So I mean, we just had people that would come by and they would write in their address because there's no cell phone signal or service. So they'd write in their address and like what their need was, like appliances need to be moved or like carpet ripped up or insulation ripped out, anything like that. And contractors were just like coming through like, where am I going next? And that was really special to see because so many of them got absolutely nothing from that other than the fact that they got to help somebody. They got to help their neighbor. So I hope that that's what I remember from it. And I hope what other people take from it is that when these events happen, we all need to stop and reflect and think about what can that community use at this time. And I think like Beloved Asheville is one organization that I think did a wonderful job of that. They were serving multiple counties around them, not just their own Buncombe County. And they certainly saved lives. They delivered water in the very early days. That was critical for people. I had people coming through that had like newborn babies in the car and they didn't even have fresh water. And it was rewarding to be able to pass that, cases of water to them. And that couldn't have been done without the effort of a lot of the nonprofits or generous independent people that came through and just donated whatever they had. But it's just like, it really sticks with you how scary and how real some of these experiences can be.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I don't think so. I mean, thank you for asking the questions. Thank you for making this. I really love Haywood County, so I hope that if anybody from Haywood watches this, they know that I have tried my best to represent them well with my heart and soul. And I think that this is an incredibly resilient area. Western North Carolina in general is incredibly resilient. People take a lot of pride in living here. It's one of the most, in my opinion, beautiful places on earth. We have a lot of natural resources and we try our best to take care of it. And so when there's damage to it, it's very emotional. But I do think that with how things are changing in our climate, we do need to be resilient and we do need to be prepared and think about the future a little more. Because I swear if I hear somebody else say in another year or two that this is a 500-year flood again, I think I'm going to get a little angry because we've had a couple of them now and it certainly has not been 500 years. So I think that we all need to take a step back and realize that this might be more normal or be becoming more normal, and we might need to adapt to those conditions moving forward.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.